Today we meet Eleanor Thompson, a woman who has spent most of her life in this small town. But when her nephew Alex and his best friend Noah come to visit, they bring an unexpected invitation. Do you think a new adventure can bring joy to anyone, regardless of age? Share your thoughts. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Vermont, the kind that casts a warm, golden light over everything. The trees were dressed in shades of orange, red, and yellow, as if nature itself was celebrating the season. Eleanor Thompson, at 68, sat by her window, sipping a cup of tea, gazing out over her little garden. The roses had bloomed beautifully that year, but now, like the leaves on the trees, they too were giving in to the season's change. Eleanor had always loved fall. It was a reminder that life had its rhythms, its seasons. As she sat, a soft smile tugged at her lips. Her nephew, Alex, was coming to visit today. It had been a few weeks since she'd last seen him, and she always looked forward to their time together. At 23, Alex was a bright, kind-hearted young man who made his life in Boston as a software developer. Yet he found time every month to drive out and spend an afternoon with her. Today, however, Alex had mentioned he was bringing someone along, a friend named Noah. Eleanor had heard about Noah before. Alex had spoken about him often, describing him as a deep thinker and a good friend, a writer who had a knack for uncovering hidden stories and bringing them to light. As Eleanor waited, she found herself feeling an unexpected spark of anticipation. It had been a long time since she'd had a visitor who wasn't family. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled Eleanor out of her thoughts. She placed her cup down, smoothing the lines of her sweater as she moved towards the door. When she opened it, there was Alex, standing tall and warm as always, with his brown curls ruffled by the breeze. Beside him was a man with dark hair and thoughtful eyes, a calm presence, but one that seemed to observe everything around him. Aunt Eleanor, Alex greeted her with a smile that could melt even the most frigid day. He wrapped his arms around her in a gentle hug. "I've missed you." Eleanor's smile grew. "It's good to see you, Alex. You look well." Alex stepped back, and with a light gesture, he introduced his friend. "Aunt Eleanor, this is Noah. I thought it was about time you two met." Noah extended his hand, his voice soft yet confident. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson." She took his hand, noting the firm but respectful grip. "Please call me Eleanor," she replied, smiling warmly. "Welcome. Come in, both of you." They settled into her cozy living room, the warm hues of the autumn sunlight filtering through the windows, casting a golden glow over everything. She poured them tea, and they began with small talk, questions about how she'd been, whether she needed help with anything around the house. Eleanor assured them she was fine, though, truthfully, having company brought more joy than any assistance they could offer. It didn't take long before Eleanor found herself drawn into their conversation. Alex and Noah shared stories about their lives in the city, their work, and their dreams for the future. Noah spoke with an understated confidence that intrigued her, a quiet charm, while Alex's enthusiasm and warmth made her feel young again. There was a liveliness, an energy that filled the room, and Eleanor found herself laughing and engaging in a way she hadn't done in years. Then, as the sunlight outside began to soften into the deep shades of afternoon, "Aunt Eleanor, I have an idea. How about we take a little drive? There's something I'd like to show you." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the suggestion. "A drive?" She chuckled softly. "I haven't been out of the house in a while, you know." "Exactly," Alex replied, grinning. "It's high time we change that. Besides, I have a surprise." The idea of breaking out of her usual routine, of seeing something beyond her garden, stirred a forgotten excitement within her. She turned to Noah, who was watching her with an encouraging smile, his eyes warm and understanding. It was as if he could sense her hesitation. "It'll be good to get some fresh air, Mrs. Thompson. I mean, Eleanor," he added with a soft chuckle. Eleanor took a moment, letting the suggestion settle. She wasn't one to do things on a whim, but perhaps, just this once, she took a deep breath, feeling a playful spark she hadn't felt in years. "All right," she said, feigning reluctance, but a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You two have convinced me. Let's go." Alex's face lit up. You won't regret it, I promise. The three of them piled into Alex's old but well-loved car. The seats were a bit worn, and there was a faint scent of pine from an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. Noah sat in the front passenger seat, while Eleanor took the back. The windows rolled down to let in the crisp autumn air. As they drove, the landscape stretched out before them. Rows of golden trees, rolling hills, and quaint houses that seemed to nod in approval as they passed by. The hum of the engine, the breeze brushing through her hair, and the familiar landscape of her hometown made Eleanor feel as if she were 20 years younger. It was strange how quickly the years had passed, and now here she was, watching the world from the back seat, a quiet passenger in her own life. As they drove further away from town, Eleanor began to feel a subtle sense of familiarity with the road they were taking. The scenery grew more rural, more secluded, until they reached a narrow dirt path that wound its way through a grove of ancient trees. She sat up straighter, her heart picking up its pace as she realized where they were going. As they pulled up to the overgrown entrance of the forest trail, Eleanor could feel a flood of memories stirring within her. The sound of the distant waterfall grew stronger with each step they took, its rhythmic cascade a familiar melody from her past. The forest stood majestic, its ancient trees reaching toward the sky, their branches creating a natural cathedral ceiling above them. Noah stepped out of the car first, taking in the scene with a reverence that suggested he understood the significance of the place, even without needing to be told. Alex opened the back door for Eleanor, offering her his hand. She took it, her grip steady, but her heart fluttering like it hadn't in years. "Thank you, Alex," she whispered, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. Alex squeezed her hand, his gaze warm and comforting. "I thought you'd appreciate it." The three of them ventured deeper into the forest, their footsteps cushioned by years of fallen leaves. Eleanor trailed her fingers along the rough bark of the trees, feeling as though she were touching pieces of her own history. The sound of the waterfall grew louder, its mist creating an ethereal atmosphere in the late afternoon light. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, and when she opened them, it was as if she could see her younger self, laughing and running through these very trees, her heart full of dreams and possibility. The forest path opened up to reveal the waterfall, its waters cascading down moss-covered rocks, creating a natural amphitheater of sound and beauty. The setting sun caught the spray, painting rainbows in the mist. Eleanor stood transfixed, overwhelmed by the beauty and the memories that came flooding back. Eleanor stood by the waterfall, her eyes distant as if looking through the veil of time. The mist from the falls caught the late afternoon light, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that seemed perfect for sharing memories. "You know," she began, her voice soft but clear above the sound of rushing water, "this place holds a very special meaning for me. Exactly 50 years ago, my high school organized a field trip here, and it was right here, by these falls, that I met my first love." Alex and Noah drew closer, captivated by the gentle nostalgia in their aunt's voice. Eleanor smiled, lost in the memory. "His name was James, and he was 2 years ahead of me in school. I remember sitting right there." She pointed to a flat rock near the water's edge, my feet dangling in the cool stream, when he walked up and asked if he could join me. I can still see his warm brown eyes and that gentle smile of his. She paused, taking a deep breath as if drawing strength from the crisp autumn air. The waterfall's steady rhythm seemed to underscore her words like a soundtrack to her memories. We talked all afternoon, completely losing track of time. James was brilliant and funny in such an effortless way. He told me about his dreams of becoming a writer, about all the books that had shaped his world. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about stories. I'd never seen anyone so passionate about anything before. Eleanor turned to Alex and Noah, her eyes sparkling with the magic of first love remembered. "You know what's funny? I can remember every detail of that day. The way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the sound of the water, the warmth in his voice. It was the first time I felt that flutter in my heart, that magical feeling when you realize you're falling for someone." Everything just seemed perfect. The whole world narrowed down to that moment, right here by this waterfall. Eleanor's eyes sparkled as she continued her story, her voice warm with cherished memories. That field trip was filled with the most wonderful activities, she said, smiling at Alex and Noah. After our chat by the stream, James invited me to join the butterfly catching contest. We ran through these woods together, laughing and working as a team to catch the most beautiful butterflies. I can still feel the flutter in my stomach when our hands accidentally touched. She paused, gazing at the waterfall with a dreamy expression. Then there was this mini climbing challenge to reach the top of the falls. James held my hand, helping me navigate the tricky parts. When we finally reached the summit and looked down at the breathtaking view below, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. The teachers had organized different team activities throughout the day. Eleanor continued, her eyes bright with the memory. We had to work together to build a makeshift bridge across a shallow part of the stream, using only logs and rope. James was so patient, explaining his ideas and listening to mine. We made such a great team. Our bridge was the only one that didn't wobble. Her voice softened as she recalled the evening activities. As night fell, everyone gathered for a bonfire. The teachers brought guitars, and we all sang together. James sat next to me, and somehow we ended up singing a duet, Moon River, if I remember correctly. His voice was deep and warm, and when our eyes met across the flickering flames, well, that's when I knew something special was happening. Eleanor turned to Alex and Noah, her expression tender. You know what really made that day magical? It wasn't just one big moment. It was all these little things. The way he'd make sure I was okay during the hike, how he shared his water when I ran out of mine, the way he remembered I mentioned loving wildflowers and gathered a small bouquet during our nature scavenger hunt. Each activity seemed to bring us closer together, and by the time the field trip ended, I knew something extraordinary had begun. She glanced at the waterfall, its constant flow a reminder of how time had passed. It's funny how clear those memories still are, the sound of our laughter echoing through these trees, the way the sunlight danced on the water, the warmth of his hand helping me across the rocks. It was more than just a school field trip. It was the beginning of my first real love story. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest took on a quiet, almost mystical glow. Alex and Noah had set up a cozy campsite beside the waterfall, the orange glow of a small campfire flickering against the trees. The smell of roasted marshmallows and sizzling skewers filled the air, mingling with the crisp autumn scent. They shared stories, laughter, and the warmth of a good meal, with Eleanor joining in, her cheeks flushed from the wine they'd all been sharing freely. As the evening grew darker, the stars began to peek out from the sky above, their light faintly illuminating the quiet pond nearby. Noah poured another glass of wine for Eleanor, and then for himself, his eyes meeting hers with a gentle, encouraging smile. "Aunt Eleanor," he said softly, "would you tell us more about that night? About you and James?" Eleanor looked up, caught off guard but warmed by their interest. The firelight danced in her eyes as she nodded, her voice softening, the story drawing her back to another time, another night much like this one. "That final evening," she began, her voice barely a whisper. After the bonfire had died down and most students had wandered back to their tents, James and I found ourselves drawn back here, to this very spot. She pointed to a flat rock just beside the pond, her gaze distant, as if she could see the echoes of her past self sitting there. Alex and Noah leaned in closer, captivated. The crackling fire and the distant rush of the waterfall provided the perfect, almost magical backdrop. "The moon was full that night," she continued, her words quiet and intimate, casting silver ripples across the water. "We sat there right by the pond, talking about everything, our dreams, our fears, the things we hoped for, the things that scared us." She paused, a soft smile on her lips. The air was cool, but neither of us wanted to leave. It was like we created a small world of our own. Her eyes sparkled as she recalled that memory. James had brought his jacket, and we shared it, sitting close together under the stars. The mist from the waterfall seemed to hang around us like a soft halo, and fireflies flickered in the dark like tiny stars that had come down just for us. It felt magical, like time had slowed just for that night. She paused, her fingers touching her lips briefly, lost in the memory. And there, with the waterfall and the gentle song of the crickets around us, we shared our first kiss. It was gentle, tentative, the kind of kiss that holds every promise of something more. It was perfect, the kind of moment that stays with you forever, no matter how many years pass. Alex and Noah exchanged glances, fully immersed in the romance of their aunt's story. They could almost see it, as though they, too, were there. A young Eleanor and James, wrapped in the moonlight, beside the endless cascade of the waterfall. Eleanor's gaze softened, her voice carrying a quiet reverence as she continued. That night, under the moonlight, with only the waterfall and the stars as our witnesses, James and I found ourselves lost in something bigger than either of us had ever known. We felt as though the world had faded away, and all that remained was our connection, pure and electric, fueled by the thrill of being young and deeply in love. Her cheeks flushed as she paused, gathering the right words. There, in the hush of the night, we crossed a threshold neither of us had expected. We held each other close, our whispers soft, our hands intertwined, as if we were each anchoring the other to this perfect, timeless moment. Every touch felt new. Every glance held a promise. And in that innocence and intensity, we let ourselves be swept away. Eleanor's voice softened to a near whisper, filled with a blend of awe and nostalgia. It was as if the stars themselves had drawn us together, two young hearts beating in sync, discovering love in its truest form, a mix of passion, wonder, and tenderness. That night, we gave ourselves fully to each other, in the way that only two people young and in love can, completely unguarded, wrapped in the warmth of a love that felt eternal. As she finished, the air around them grew still, her words resonating in the quiet of the evening. Alex and Noah, deeply moved, remained close, sharing in the weight of a memory that had lasted a lifetime. As Eleanor's words hung in the night air, a gentle silence settled around them. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow that seemed to wrap around the three of them, deepening the sense of intimacy they shared. Alex and Noah, captivated by her story and the tender, youthful love she had described, found themselves moved in ways they hadn't expected. They could almost feel the magic of that night, the powerful innocence and wonder of first love radiating from their aunt's voice. Sensing the emotion in her, Alex reached out, his hand resting gently on Eleanor's shoulder, a quiet show of comfort and connection. "That's beautiful, Aunt Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you for sharing that with us." Noah, sitting on her other side, placed a hand over hers, giving it a light, reassuring squeeze. His gaze was warm, filled with both admiration and affection. "It's clear how special that memory is to you," he murmured, "and I think anyone would feel lucky to have had something like that." Eleanor looked at her nephews, feeling a quiet gratitude for their presence. Their closeness, the gentle support they offered, reminded her of the beauty of connection, of being truly understood. The three of them stayed that way, close together by the fire, letting the magic of the evening and the bond they shared speak louder than words ever could. In the quiet of the night, only the sounds of the waterfall, the faint chirping of crickets, and the crackling of the dying campfire surrounded them. Alex and Noah remained close to Eleanor, each nephew offering a quiet presence, as if drawn by the warmth of her story and the bond they shared in that moment. Without speaking, Alex wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders, drawing her close. On her other side, Noah placed a hand on hers, offering silent support, and Eleanor felt herself relax, comforted by their presence. They stayed that way, wrapped in a soft, shared warmth under the starry sky, the quiet love of family bringing peace that needed no words. When morning's first light filtered through the trees, Eleanor was the first to stir. She found herself nestled between her nephews, their steady breaths a comforting rhythm around her. A smile played at her lips as she watched the soft light fill the tent, and she felt an unfamiliar, joyful thrill, a quiet happiness that made her feel as though she'd somehow regained the freshness of her youth. In that peaceful moment, Eleanor lay still, savoring the warmth and closeness of the one she loved most. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in years, simple, deep, and full of life. Today helped Eleanor feel the joy of youth again through a trip with Alex and Noah. Do you believe that the connection between generations can bring inspiration to both sides? Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to follow more meaningful stories.